right, everybody. Welcome back into the Fantasy 5 podcast brought to you by Sideline Sports. I'm your host, JT, and we've got a packed show today. We're talking the Week 4 preview. We're going to be talking injuries, the waiver wire pickups, rookie rankings, and my bet slip, where I go over 5 of my favorite bets for Thursday Night Football today. Today, it's between the Bengals and the Dolphins, so it's going to be a great matchup. So stay tuned for that. But without further ado, let's hop right into injuries. We're going to do the same thing we did last week, where we go over 5 teams rather than 5 individual players. There's several teams I've seen who definitely have the injury bug, so I'm going to go over them. So first up, we've got the Lions. DeAndre Swift is doubtful, but if you can interpret Dan Campbell's quotes over the past few days, I'd call him definitely out, or at least very, very limited as far as Sunday's matchup goes. I'd say the same thing for Amon-Ra St. Brown. He has an ankle injury that he sustained in the first half of last week's game. He came in the second half, actually, but he really struggled. You could see he was favoring his other leg. Point is, the Lions have their bye in 2 weeks. So it's probably smarter for Dan Campbell to hold out these star young guys, or at least considerably limit their snap counts for the next couple weeks, just to get them to that bye week where they can really rest up and then come back more effective. But no matter what, that's going to limit their snap counts. That's going to limit their fantasy production as well. So people to keep your eye out for would be on the Dolphins, or on the Lions rather. Next up, we've got the Bucs. Those wide receivers are still battling a lot of injuries. Luckily, they have Mike Evans coming back after that suspension he had last week. But Godwin and Julio Jones are both questionable, although I would give the edge to Julio. I do believe he's going to play. It's still, a little bit up in the air for Godwin. Also questionable is Russell Gage, guy who was able to help them get out of the hole last week, although it wasn't, at a victorious effort. But he's still got that hamstring issue he's dealing with. And Brashad Perriman, who went out last week with a knee and a hamstring issue, is still trying to work through that. They're both questionable as well. Next up, we've got the Saints. Their offense is just riddled with injuries. They play in London this weekend against the Vikings, and all of the following guys were not able to practice on Wednesday with the team. Michael Thomas, I should say, Jarvis Landry, Jameis Winston, and right tackle Ryan Ramczyk. That doesn't count Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill, who were both limited. So safe to say that offense definitely just has the injury bug. Guys to keep your eye out for, especially considering if Jameis Winston doesn't play, that's really going to change up the whole scheme of the offense. Next up, we've got the Cardinals. They also have injuries across several different positions. From the wide receiver position, Marquise Brown, AJ Green, they both didn't practice on Wednesday. Zach Ertz also didn't practice the tight end position. And then you've got Rondale Moore and James Conner were both limited. So, across all facets of their offense, they've got some injuries going on. So definitely guys to keep your eye out for as far as their fantasy output's going to go. And lastly, we've got the Giants. Everybody saw Sterling Shepard go down in the first half against the Cowboys on Monday. He's already on the IR. So that's going to add on to the already poor passing game that the Giants have going for them. Kadarius Toney and Wan'Dale Robinson are both questionable, neither of whom played last week. Kadarius Toney played the first 2 weeks, and Wan'Dale Robinson just played week 1. But this test is really going to feature some new guys like Richie James, David Sills, Toney, and Robinson, as I stated. This is also going to be a big test for Kenny Golladay. It's going to be one of his biggest opportunities to show that he still has something left in the tank. So it's going to be an interesting matchup for him. And with that said, we're going to go ahead and move into waiver wire pickups. So first up, I've got Romeo Doubs out of Green Bay. Aaron Rodgers has been begging for a receiver to start catching passes literally since the first play of the Packers season, with Christian Watson dropping that deep ball. So Romeo Doubs got 8 catches on 8 targets last week, and he found himself in the end zone for the first time. So that's a great way for him to do just that, become that receiver that Aaron Rodgers can consistently go to. He ended last week with 20 fantasy points, so hopefully he's going to be able to keep that momentum going against the Patriots this week. There's also great value and potential in this guy outside of the matchup against the Patriots this week, and he's still available in over half of your fantasy leagues. Next up, David Njoku out of my Cleveland Browns. He's currently sitting at the tight end 9, so tough to call him a waiver wire pickup, but he's only rostered in 57% of leagues. Last week, he racked up almost 24 fantasy points, 9 catches, 10 targets. You can't expect those numbers every week, but the matchup against the Falcons this week is just too tempting for me to not pick him up. The Falcons themselves give up the second most fantasy points to tight ends, so this is the week that you've got to pull the trigger on David Njoku. Next up, Jamal Williams out of Detroit. As I just said before, DeAndre Swift has that bad injury. It's not a smart play for them to play him. Jamal Williams, I'd almost guarantee, is going to be the lead back out of Detroit this week. In the 20, and I saw this stat, in the 23 games that he's gotten 15 or more touches, he averages 16.6 fantasy points and over 96 yards in those games. So I'd assume he's going to get to 15 touches in this game. So, if the math works out, he's going to get you at least 16.6 fantasy points. So he's the guy for you this week. Next up, Khalil Herbert. David Montgomery is also injured, so he's another guy to keep your eye on. Khalil Herbert has stated time and time again that he is able to take on that heavy workload to be that RB1 for the Bears. He got 28.9 points last week, over 150 yards, 2 scores, and that's not even playing in the full game. That's just taking over the workload in the first half. The stats speak for themselves with Khalil Herbert, so he's another guy you've got to add onto your team as far as running backs go. Lastly, for waiver wire pickups, we've got Richie James. I spoke on the Giants earlier. I spoke on Richie James real quick, and I think he's going to be the best guy for the Giants this week. With the Sterling Shepard injury, there's several low-tier receivers on the Giants, and I think Richie James just has the best potential to break out as a primary target for Daniel Jones. So that's going to do it for the waiver wire pickups. We're going to go ahead and move into the rookie rankings now. First up, I have Dameon Pierce. He's my number 5 guy. I should preface this. Hasn't much changed this week as far as the players go. Only one guy's out that was in last week, and that's Treylon Burks. The spots these guys are ranked at has definitely shaken up, though. So let's go ahead and hop right back into it. Sorry about that. First up, we've got Dameon Pierce. He's moved ahead of Rex Burkhead in most fantasy rankings, so hopefully he's going to continue to establish himself as that RB1, and he's been having a great year so far. Next up, we've got Jahan Dotson. He had a rough game this week, but he had such a great couple weeks that I've still got him here on my top 5. He only had 2 receptions on 8 targets, but that is not to say that it wasn't his fault, because Carson Wentz was a pile of rotten garbage. He was that was one of the worst quarterbacking performances I've ever seen. So I'm kind of just trying my best to just completely put it out of my mind and give Jahan Dotson the benefit of the doubt on this one, because he had a lot better passes coming from Sean Clifford at Penn State than he did last week with Carson Wentz. Next up, Garrett Wilson. Flacco has been feeding this guy for the first 3 weeks. So the quarterback question with Zach Wilson coming back in could really affect his target share, but I've still got him here as far as this week goes on my rookie rankings number 3. He's averaging 11 targets per game. 11 targets is insane, especially for a rookie, and he's averaging 17 fantasy points. He's a fantastic wide receiver in any capacity, especially as rookies go. So a lot of people are going to be saying he could be ranked higher, and I don't hate that, but he could definitely still. He's got a lot of movement to go. He can move up a couple spots really quickly. He could also go down if he has another terrible game. So we're gonna have to keep an eye on him. Next up, Chris Olave. He had 9 catches on 12 targets last week for 147 yards. I believe I saw a stat, or I heard a stat today, I think it was on Fantasy Football Focus or whatever, that he has like 160 more air yards than the second receiver with the most air yards. So like he is absolutely dominating in air yards perspective. So, and it showed last week 147 yards. That's because Jameis loves to air it out. So as I said earlier, he didn't practice on Wednesday, so that could definitely be in jeopardy if Jameis doesn't suit up for Olave. But as of right now, I've got him as my number 2. And topping it all off, we've got Drake London. He's a dog. He has 16 catches on 25 targets so far, 214 yards and 2 touchdowns. I've just seen him running the cleanest routes that I've seen any rookie be running so far. And he's making considerable progress, like game by game, especially as far as rookies go. So this week he's topping my rookie rankings, but that's not to say that it's not going to move too much next week. I'm excited to see how it goes. It's kind of like a slow week as far as the rookies went this week, so hopefully it's going to be able to shake it up this week. Next up, lastly, I should say, we've got the bet slip. We're going to be going over 5 bets for Bengals and Dolphins today. And let's hop right into it. Bengals -4. I've got them plus 100. I moved the line just half a point. It was set at 3.5, and I believe that that's just the biggest rat line I've ever seen. You got to take the points here. They're begging you to take the Dolphins, so that's exactly why I'm going to go with the Bengals here. Having them at plus 100 is a pretty nice a nice simple like, okay, I can just put a bet here on the Bengals plus 100. If it hits, I'm double, no problem. Next up, longest made field goal. We've got that over 46.5 yards. I've been loving this bet so far. It's just a fun bet to track. If there's ever a field goal, it's like a boring drive. You're not getting any fantasy points. But I like to make a bet on it so that it's a good time. I've got it at over 46.5 yards. I'm 2 for 2 so far, both of which Brendan McManus for the Broncos hit. So hopefully I'm going to get Evan McPherson to hit this for me, or whoever the hell the Dolphins have. I can't even remember. I've got that at minus 112. Next up, Joe Mixon, his longest rush. I've got that to be over 15.5 yards. I got that at minus 114. I think that he can have explosive plays, and he's going to get. Obviously, he's the workhorse for Cincinnati. There's the co-host Luna, just in time, making an appearance here. Here, hop on. Yeah, so I think he's going to go over 15.5 yards. I don't think he's going to, have too much trouble with that. Next up, we've got Chase Edmonds. Excuse me, Luna. We've got Chase Edmonds over 32.5 yards. It's him and Mostert. The lines for Mostert, I think, was 39.5. I just see them getting a pretty even share, and I think Miami's really going to try to establish the running game this week because there's been so much attention to the receiving core with Tyreek and Waddle having so much success over the past, couple weeks. So, or a few weeks, I should say, over the start of the season. So we're going to see what happens with Chase Edmonds over 32.5 yards. It's one of those stats that could be done in one play. But I think they're going to split time well, him and Mostert, and I think they could both potentially go over their rushing props. Lastly, we've got T. Higgins over 5.5 receptions. Here, Luna, just hop right here. We've got T. Higgins over 5.5 receptions. He didn't have a lot of receptions last week at one, or I don't even know. He had a rough game, so I think he's really gonna. This is just his chance to bounce back. I think he's gonna do that, and we've got that at plus 123. I love to see those odds. So, yeah, I'd love to see T. Higgins come back in a big way, and that is going to go ahead and do it for me on Fantasy 5 this week. We covered the Week 4 preview. Thank you very much for tuning in. Me and Luna, thank you. Say goodbye, Luna. And yeah, we'll go ahead and see you next week. Thanks very much for tuning in. Bye-bye.